Hey there, we are back with Chapter 7 Issues of Rejection, Trust and Intimacy, and Loyalty. So, Nancy Newton Verrier starts off with a quote: "There is a deep yearning inside to have a lasting and meaningful relationship with someone, but it scares me because if you let yourself get too close, you can't trust that you won't be abandoned again. The fear of rejection, the way I take of this, is to reject the other person first. They never have a chance." An adoptee. Difficulties in relationships. The adult adoptees can come in for psychotherapy. The usual presenting problem is difficulties in relationships. It is rare for the adoptee to come in and say, "I want to work on my adoption issues." When that does happen, it is usually after he or she has been in treatment for years with little noticeable change. Then the conversation goes something like, "Well, I've worked on everything else, and I guess I have to finally admit that my adoption might have something to do with what's going on." This is a very big step because it means that the denial has been pierced. It also must be recognized that there is probably a great deal of guilt connected to letting the idea out of the depths of the unconscious and into the light of day. So I'm also going to add that I didn't do this, but I sought out because I became out of the fog, and coming out of the fog is quite dangerous. But I knew that I was having issues and I wanted to do better. And I knew at that point it all stemmed from this, which is why I specifically sought out help. It's not because I had dealt with everything else. I think adoption is the stem of it. And I recognize that finally. Well, I guess that's the same thing, wouldn't it? Anyway, as mentioned, as at the mention of adoption, if the clinician is at all willing to accept its significance, they often assume that there have been something wrong with the adoptive parents, which may or may not be true. And again, the issue of what happened before the child entered the family, unless they were multiple and or abusive foster homes, is overlooked. In any case, the abandonment and substitution of mothers is rarely considered a significant factor in what is going on for the adoptee. And yet, the experience of abandonment has a legacy which branches out into various other issues, which affect adoptees to some degree. In most of the significant relationships, the fear of abandonment does not leave an adoptee when they reach adulthood, but can be seen in a way in which they conduct their relationships with important people in their life. For people who have had continuity from pre to postnatal bonding, the original attachment and bonding experience, and the appropriate separation from the mother at the proper time in one's development prepares one for many attachments and separations over and over throughout one's life. There may be a sense of missing someone if a loss is temporary, or a real sense of loss and sadness if a separation is permanent. But short separations are often important losses do not usually paralyze or cause panic. One can see a friend once every 2 years and rest assured that one is remembered and loved in the meantime. There is no sense that one might disappear from a friend's conscious or that one might indeed just disappear. One can go on with life. Annihilation will not happen. Yet for many adoptees, if they have not completely withdrawn emotionally, this is just the phenomenon they describe upon significant or even temporary separations and losses: panic and fear of annihilation. The panic and fear have nothing to do with the present circumstance, as difficult as it may be. Rather, it has to do with the triggering archaic memory traces of the original abandonment and the life-threatening experience that it was. Each impending or perceived threat of abandonment sets up a domino effect of other issues, which inhibits the normal ebb and flow of relationships, their establishment, deepening, or even their endings. Some of these issues are fear of rejection, lack of trust, fear of intimacy, loyalty, shame and guilt, identity and power of mastery, and control. Although these issues will manifest in different ways and affect each person in varying degrees, it has been my observation that for those adoptees who are no longer in denial, As a defense against true feelings, all of these issues are present to some degree. Now, it might be said that these issues are present for everyone to some degree, not just for adoptees, but it is not enough to be aware of the issues. One also needs to ascertain and respect the etiology or cause, the experiences which brought about the issues. An adoptee who gets into treatment because of a relationship issues will need to have their therapist recognize those issues of abandonment, fear of intimacy, and splitting between good and bad as having different causes from those of a person who is suffering. For instance, from certain personality disorders. The difference is not always respected by clinicians, to the detriment of the treatment process, and having considered the effects of separation, loss, and what other issues which are precipitated by the separation closely related to a fear of abandonment is the fear of any type of rejection. Fear of rejection. Being wanted by my adoptive parents does not compare to being unwanted by my mother, an adoptee. The bad baby syndrome. The particular adoptee quoted above said that she didn't feel chosen. She felt rejected. A baby can be chosen by one set of parents unless they have already been unchosen. A baby can't be chosen by one set of parents unless they've already been unchosen by the first set. Since it's hard to figure out what a tiny baby can do to become unchosen, it must have been who they were that was rejected. This is the feeling reported by many adoptees. When they are able to put to words to their very early feelings, the words are something like this: a mother wouldn't give away a good baby, therefore I must have been a bad baby. This feeling of having an innate flaw carries over even into adulthood. This sets up adopted children for feelings of failure on every level, when every subsequent rejection, even the slightest one, simply reinforces their beliefs in their innate badness. One therapist, attempting to get through her patient's conviction that she had been and still carried within her a bad baby, actually had the patient hold a baby and look carefully at it. She then asked, "How bad do you think that baby can be?" It was only then that the adoptee began to wonder about the long-held belief in her innate badness. Relationships become dangerous, not only because one can't trust the people with whom they want to relate, but also they might find out about the quote-unquote bad baby. The fear is exemplified by the hesitancy with which many adoptees get into relationships. The difficulties begin in childhood, where they find themselves isolating of having a few friends. They sometimes develop a state of acute anxiety with accompanying feelings of isolation, unreality, and alienation, often attributed to maternal failure in infancy. To the adoptee, it doesn't necessarily seem like maternal failure, but baby failure. Glenda, who suffered from asthma most of her life, hey, that's me, often felt as if she were suffocating. That's the feeling of asthma. Not lying, and I shouldn't be laughing, but that's true. She said that she associated the feeling of suffocation with having been abandoned and feeling that she doesn't have the right to exist. The losers and stoners. Valerie isolated herself as a child by avoiding everyone with the exception of one friend. She described herself as always feeling like an awful person. As a student, she only associated with people at the bottom of the list so far as popularity was concerned, because that's where she felt she belonged. Oh, that's interesting. I guess I kind of did too, but also I try to befriend everyone, and anytime that they wouldn't want to be friends, like I didn't do anything wrong, I was just kind, it was a lot of hurt. It was a lot of rejection, and I never understood why. Anyway, Mary Beth says that she was well liked but didn't feel popular. She recalls being a loner, a I can't even say this word anymore. Melancholy kid As a child, she would show off for adults, but wouldn't mix with other children. As an adolescent, she ran around with the popular crowd, but she felt like a fraud. Norma says that people like her, but she doesn't trust getting close. She was always nice to people because you never know who your birth mother is. She says of her youth that she didn't do pot or other drugs, but nevertheless always associated with the groups known as the losers and stoners. That's where she felt she belonged. Those were the people who would accept her. Wow. Jody, who said that he loved school and pushed himself into being an overachiever, nevertheless had difficulty with peers. I didn't work well with people my own age. I tended to just shut off. This feeling of shutting themselves off to avoid possible rejection can perhaps be summed up by Mary Beth, who said, I will set the scene so that hopefully I won't be rejected, or it won't even come near that. So I won't have to go through that rejection. I just don't want to take the chance that they are going to reject me in any way, whether it be small, medium, or large. For many adoptees, one way of assuring that they won't be rejected is to associate with the losers and stoners of life. Yeah, I still felt rejected, but okay. Testing out. For many of the adoptees, the fear of rejection and their need to defend against further rejections causes them to withdraw and isolate themselves. For others, however, this is a tendency to push for rejection, even though this is the opposite of what they want. Johanna lists the greatest fear throughout her life as that of not being loved or liked. She constantly tests people, beginning with her parents, to see if they will reject her. She will get superficially close to people, but never really lets them to know her. She thinks that her feelings of unworthiness go back to her initial rejection and have become a pattern in her life. This fear of rejection sometimes sets up a counterphobic reaction of rejecting others before one is rejected, sabotaging relationships, in other words, instead of the golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do to you. The rule of these adoptees is do unto others first that which you fear they're going to do to you. This is often what happens in the relationship with the adoptive mother, where she is tested over and over again, and over and over again to see if she is going to reject the child. Constant anxiety caused by the expectation of her eventual eventual rejection and the child's need to let her know how they feel creates a cycle of rejective behavior between mother and child, which is destructive to their self-esteem and to their relationship. It is not just the adoptive mother who experienced this testing behavior. Allison says, I can't stay in destructive relationships, all right, because this is what I feel I deserve. But if I accidentally find myself with a really good person, I always do something to destroy it. I don't do this on purpose. I don't even realize it until it's over. However, other people do realize their tendency to destroy relationships, I know that I'm setting out for sabotage myself, but I can't seem to help it. Tony says, it seems to be coming from outside of myself. Every once in a while I catch myself, but it's usually only in a delay of reprieve. The next time I'll really do it. The next time he'll leave. Sorry, that's a quote. This testing out or rejecting behavior is often an enigma for the friends and partners of the adoptees. As described by the adoptee at the beginning of the chapter, many of their friends feel as if they haven't been given a chance. They're at a loss to know what is going on or what to do about it. Joan really mystifies me. She will just finish telling me how much I mean to her. Then boom, she says something which she knows hurts me, or she'll get out she'll go out with another guy or something. I don't get it. All right. Rejection and work. One of the problems often expressed to me by my parents of adolescent adoptees is their reluctance to get jobs, which is perceived by the parents as laziness. I believe that there's more to it than that. When asked to talk about why they find it so difficult to look for work, adoptees will often say that they might not get the job. In other words, they might be rejected by the interviewer or lost, who, for one reason or another, wants another person for that job. Now, while many people would just go to the next interview and keep pursuing it until a job was found, the adoptee will now often feel paralyzed by that initial rejection. It is felt not just as a failure to have unnecessary skills or training for the job, but as a rejection to their basic person. They were not good enough for the job. They were a failure. This makes going out and facing the next interview seem like a monumental task. A simple acknowledgement by the parents that they understand what is going on, even if the adoptee denies it, which they may do, because they are not always consciously aware of it, may help the child, the adoptee, feel understood or at least uncriticized and more willing to try again. Just chastising them for being lazy is not going to help. Oh man, I told this to my APs all the time. Not necessarily about work, because I do, but about other things, and they don't get it. You chastise someone, it's not going to help. It creates more frustration and anger. Anyway, the fear of rejection in the workplace is often accompanied by a fear of success or an inability to believe in one's competency or expertise. There is a kind of self-rejection of one's own talents and capabilities, which sometimes result in sabotaging of one's own success. Ooh, I've done that. Or else, in the paradoxical way, these things work for adoptees. There's a need to be perfect, to be the best, to get one more PhD, to prove that one has the right to exist. Yes, I do this. I feel the need to be perfect, and then I self-sabotage, and it's a hot mess, and it's so frustrating to deal with this because I recognize this, obviously, and I still can't get over it. Like, I'm not even kidding you. I feel paralyzed when I feel the need for perfection, and then it doesn't go anywhere. And, like, that's kind of what I've been dealing with in my business right now. And it's so frustrating because I have so much work to do. It's frustration. It just gets worse. Anyway, Barney says that the fear of rejection gets worse with age, but he has learned to handle it better. That is connected to his feelings of unworthiness, which he knows intellectually are unfounded. That's probably caused more trouble for me in my life than anything else if I ever once just believed that I was special. God has given me so many gifts and so many people who have had so much enjoyment from my music, and I'm still not believing it's most of the time. The fear that he is unworthy makes the fear that they are unworthy makes the adoptee so very sensitive to criticism. The slightest hint of rejection that many people feel at a loss to know how to keep from triggering it. It interferes with relationships, jobs, and school, and often brings about the very outcome which the adoptee fears. That's true. Issues of trust and intimacy. The issues of trust and intimacy are closely related to those of abandonment and rejection. There is a fluid movement among the issues that is difficult to separate them. The adoptee's lack of trust in a permanency of relations bring about a distrust of closeness or intimacy and a need for distancing. At the same time, there is a yearning for that very thing which is feared. The confusion about what the true feeling was expressed by Janice, who said that she has difficulty in all aspects of relationships and can't always distinguish between trust and attachment. If I'm feeling unworthy, it's going to be difficult to trust anybody because I don't believe that they can really like me, because I don't feel that I'm very likable. Therefore, I'm not going to be very intimate. I'm afraid that they are going to reject me. She either doesn't allow herself to attach in the first place or has difficulty leaving even bad relationships. I see this often. She feels like a really bad person if she leaves, or even if they do. She always assumes that the fault is hers. She doesn't want to reject other people. She would rather be rejected herself than do that to someone else. She is used to dealing with rejection and can handle it. She feels that her problem in separating is based on the loss that she feels. After one especially painful loss, Janice decided to put my feelings in a box and not feel. This lasted for 8 years, until she had strong feelings for a therapist. Most of the relationships to which she referred were those with men. She was not sure how she would react to the loss of a woman friend, because except for the therapist, she hasn't had close relationships with women for long enough to see how that works. She's just beginning to have close relationships with a few selected women, but it feels very scary. I chose to explore Janice's experience more fully because she, as a result of her therapy and much introspection, had reached a point where she was able to articulate that at which many adoptees can only hint: distrust of the feminine. As it has been shown in the often tumultuous relationship between the adoptee and the adoptive mother, women are often seen as abandoners, unworthy of trust. This belief extends to other women as well. Although the one best friend of most adoptees is usually the same sex as themselves, the rest of their friends and acquaintances tend to be for both sexes, boys or men. There is a general feeling of not trusting girls or women, of not being accepted by them, or of feeling generally uncomfortable around them. After years of therapy, Vanita is just beginning to trust her relationships with women. I always thought they didn't like me, that they'd like other people better, that it was probably easier for them to be closer to somebody else. Well, I thought I was reading, and apparently I wasn't, so we're going to continue where we left off. Wanda volunteered that she has some difficulty believing that people really like her, especially women. If women like me, I freak out. In the last year or two, she has met some women who genuinely like her. I know they like me, and it just kills me, and that means more to me than any relationship I've ever had, she began to cry. Judy, who rationalized her preference for men by believing she enjoyed talking about ideas, perhaps safer than talking about feelings, now says that she prefers being around women. She still fears they will disappear from her life. However, this fear was voiced by Allison, who said she is constantly surprised when her women friends remember her and like her. She cannot retain this idea when she is not with them. Difficulties in separation. Many adoptees find it difficult to attach or allow closeness in relationships because of that fear that each new relationship, like the very first, will not last. Bill describes it as being very cautious before allowing closeness, so that he won't have to face abandonment. He doesn't attach very readily, but once attached has difficult times separating. Separating seems to be even greater problem than attaching. Once a relationship is established, many adoptees do not want to separate, even when that relationship proves unsatisfactory. Trudy had been in what she described as a quote-unquote real sick marriage with an older man for several years. The relationship seemed to her more like a parent-child relationship than a marriage. Ooh, I know those. That is why I say be careful when you are with older, a big distance in relationship, because that will and can happen. Even though she's very unhappy, she could not leave the relationship until she had undergone some intense therapy. Yeah, if you feel like you're being treated like a child by your significant other, run for the hills. Do not stay, because It's very scary and it can be very abusive. Meredith says, I'm afraid to open up about my feelings. I never tell my friends everything, just like some women do. I don't want to get too close. I just lost my place. Afraid to open up and never, I don't want to get too close. But when I do, I attach. When I do attach it all, I can't let go. I mourn losses for a long time. Distrusting the self. Distrust is evident not only in the permanency of relationships, but in the goodness of self as described previously. This lack of self-esteem or self-worth is intricately intertwined with the lack of trust and fear of intimacy described by many adoptees with whom I have spoken. I guess it was best summed up by Denise, who said, if my own mother doesn't love me, who can? Reassuring her that her mother did love her isn't helpful, because it brings up the non sequitur. Your mother really loved you, so she gave you up. This may make sense to the adult adoptee on the intellectual level, but it does not make any sense to the baby who resides within the adult. So yes, when people say this, they are equating abandonment with love, and they don't understand. And the reason being is, especially if you're not a fellow adoptee, you're coming from a different point of view, and you're not understanding that there is that primal wound where even if it was necessary, even if that was true, for us, it's still abandonment. They were still not there, and we're always going to have questions of why. Why didn't you keep me? Why didn't you try harder? Why did you... So 38% of women then go on to have other children. Why did you end up having more kids? Why couldn't you have given me up for kin? Why couldn't it have been temporary? Whatever the question may be, we're always going to ask why. Even if we reunite, even if we know all those answers, deep down inside, we still feel that abandonment, and we're still going to have those lifelong issues, even through therapy. I hate to say that. Now, don't get me wrong. Therapy is great. Please have an adoption trauma-informed therapist. But it's not going to be, well, you're healed and now you're good. It's we're working on it lifelong, and those feelings are still going to be there. How are you going to handle those? Some things may trigger it, some things may not, and that's okay. But we have to recognize that. Anyway, moving on. Loyalty. Regardless of the issues of rejection, trust, and intimacy which emanate from the original relinquishment, and even in spite of the eventual feelings of rage which may arise, there seems to be a sense of loyalty stemming from the profound connection between biological mother and child. B.J. Lifton, who has written extensively about adoption, once told me that the difficulty in bonding with the adoptive mother is not so much a matter of trust as it is a matter of loyalty to the first mother. While I disagreed with her at first, I now believe that both of the issues of trust and loyalty are present in the dilemma of the child. Okay, divided loyalty. I have a lot to say on this one. On the personal level, once I was able to give up the idea that I was going to be the mother, that I could take the place of the biological mother. So just a reminder, Nancy Newton-Verrier is not only a clinical psychologist, but she's also an adoptive parent. So she comes from both perspectives. There was a kind of relaxation in my daughter's attitude towards me. I never really expressed this to her in words, but there was a way in which I must have conveyed the idea to her that she no longer had to defend that place in her heart against intrusion from me. I don't want to give the impression that this was easy for me to do. It was only years after therapy and soul searching that I was able to have such a transpersonal attitude in my relationship with my beloved daughter. She is my daughter, but I am not her only mother. So yeah, actually, let me talk about this experience from my point of view as an adoptee. This is what my mother did, my AP. before she adopted me, she went through therapy, she did all the training. In fact, oddly enough, she actually read this book. So when I asked her for it again, she was like, "Oh my God, I know that book. I read it." And supposedly she's willing to read it again. Anywho, this part gets me because she's never felt, or I've never felt like she was trying to immediately replace my birth mom. She always has recognized her as another parent. Now, they don't co parent, and I kind of wish that would have been possible in a better way besides open adoption. Like, I wish my birth mom could have been there for Christmases and, at birthdays, but being a big distance and my birth mom not having the money and my parents not being as wealthy as, one would hope that would be possible, it didn't work out. But my mom has always expressed that she is always there, but she will never replace my birth mom. And that means the world to me. And while I know my dad is protective, he also says the same thing. He's like, I want to protect you, but I recognize that as well. The thing is that as the adoptee, we feel like sometimes we have to coddle both relationships, especially when reunited, where we have loyalty to our APs, and I'm talking like, we're talking the 1% good adoptions, right? So like my case, where we feel like we have this loyalty to our APs and want to bubble their feelings so that they don't get hurt by us feeling hurt or us wanting to find our bio family. And it's really difficult, and that's why a lot of adoptees, if they ever go looking for their for their bio parents, it's often not until their APs have passed, or unless they get permission. And I'm saying a lot, I'm not saying everyone, obviously, because they want to bottle those feelings. Now, in some cases where they did reunite and the APs are still alive, it's then confusing to carefully walk the line where we want to protect the feelings of our birth mother because they're the one that gave us blood, and our APs who raised us. And I don't remember if I spoke about this with you guys, but I have on my TikTok, was that both families are real, right? They're both real. They're both sets of parents. Now, some adoptees will be like, well, my APs are my real parents. Well, that would imply something was fake, right? And that's not true. They're both real. It's just maybe you are a little bit more loyal to one because they raised you. And adoptees are allowed to feel the way they feel. They're allowed to express their emotions. They're allowed to, hate and love and have anger and sadness. Every emotion that you want to put towards it is absolutely valid. But here's my issue with it, is that both adoptive parents and birth parents have to recognize that no matter what, they both had choices and they both had control of the situation. Now, more so the APs than the birth parents, because the birth parents were often coerced and manipulated. And I do think some of that is to do with APs, like they were a little bit too through agencies and the societal point of view. But it's the child's emotions that are most important. And so when neither party can accept that child's feelings and experiences are the most important, it is a problem. And they're torn, and it hurts even more. Okay, sorry. I went on a rant, but it was needed. Anyway, let's continue. The loyalty toward the birth mom is only one part of the picture. There is at the same time a sense of loyalty to the adoptive parents, which often enters into the decision about whether or not to search. Didn't I say that? It is often assumed by the adoptee, sometimes correctly and sometimes incorrectly, that the adoptive parents will feel rejected or replaced by any relationship between the child and their biological parents. This sense of loyalty does not always disappear with the assurance that the adoptive parents understand the need to search and will even assist it in implementing it. Just as there seems to be a great deal of trouble believing that a parent can equally love more than one child, everyone needs the best loved child. There seems to be difficulty in believing that a child can love two sets of parents. This disbelief may be present in the child as well as in the parents. Michelle said to me, if my parents are willing to share me with my birth parents, maybe that means they don't really love me. This wasn't the only time I heard adoptees express ambivalent feelings about their adoptive parents' willingness to share their child. It seems as if for some adoptees, the fear that their parents would object might instead be a wish that they would object, a proof of their parents' devotion. Loyalty to the lost child. Birth mothers also have a sense of loyalty to the lost child. There is a high rate of secondary infertility among them, perhaps as high as 40%. Those who never conceived again say things such as, I couldn't be unfaithful to them. I have a hard time even holding my little nephew. I felt unworthy to be a mother after giving my firstborn away. It would be disloyal to her to have another baby. She will always be my only child. There is so much pain and guilt connected to the surrendering of the child that many birth mothers give up their rights to the motherhood. Divided loyalty, which is quite visible in step families, is also present in adoptive families, although it is more covert. This makes the relationship to the adoptive parents, the birth parents, and to others very confusing and conflicted for adoptees. The adoptive mother often feels like the wicked stepmother, an interloper in the connection and loyalty between her child and the first mother. Although most adoptive mothers are not apt to put it this way, whereas birth mother may feel guilty for having given up her baby, the adoptive mother feels guilty for somehow failing to adequately take her place. The child feels guilty for having been born.